8. The soldier on his knees heard the number and closed his eyes tighter. His lips moved faster, trying to fit a lifetime of prayer into a handful of seconds. 9. Around him, 23 other men knelt in the Missouri dirt. Some were crying, some were silent. Some had already given up and simply waited for the end. 10. Bill Anderson raised his pistol. The morning sun glinted off the barrel. The soldier never saw it. He was still praying when the bullet entered his skull. This is the story of 10 seconds. The 10 seconds Bill Anderson gave 24 unarmed Union soldiers to make peace with God before he executed them. But this is also the story of what happened after. The story of 147 cavalry soldiers who rode to avenge the dead. The story of how 30 guerrillas waited for them in the tall Missouri grass. The story of how the math said Union victory and the reality said massacre. This is the story of Centralia. The whole story, not just the executions on the platform, but the battle that followed. The worst Union defeat of the entire guerrilla war. Why 10 seconds? That is the question that haunted survivors of Centralia for years afterward. Why did Bill Anderson count? Why did he give them time to pray? Was it mercy? Was it cruelty? Was it something else entirely? The answer is more disturbing than either option. Bill Anderson was not being merciful. He was not being cruel. He was being theatrical. He was creating a spectacle, a performance designed to terrify everyone who witnessed it and everyone who would hear about it later. The 10 seconds served a purpose. They allowed fear to build. They gave the victims just enough time to understand what was happening without being able to do anything about it. They transformed a simple execution into a ritual, a ceremony of death with Bill Anderson as the high priest. Think about what those 10 seconds meant to the men kneeling on that platform. 1 second to realize this was real, 2 seconds to understand there was no escape, 3 seconds to think of family, 4 seconds to remember everything you wished you had done differently, 5 seconds to wonder if there was a God, 6 seconds to hope there was, 7 seconds to try to pray, 8 seconds to feel your heart pounding so loud you could barely hear the count, 9 seconds to know this was the end, 10 seconds to... nothing. The bullet came, the count finished, and another man fell. Bill Anderson did this 24 times that morning. 24 counts. 24 prayers cut short. 24 men who had 10 seconds to prepare for eternity. And he never lost count, never rushed, never hesitated. He gave each man exactly what he promised. 10 seconds, not 9, not 11. 10. That precision is what made Bill Anderson terrifying. He was not wild, he was not out of control, he was methodical, calculated, patient. He killed with the same care that other men used to build things. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. To understand why 147 Union cavalry soldiers would ride into a trap that killed almost all of them, you need to understand what happened on that train platform. You need to understand what made Major AVE Johnston so angry that he ignored every warning and led his men to their deaths. You need to understand the massacre. The train pulled into Centralia station on a hot September morning, September 27, 1864. It was supposed to be a routine stop, pick up passengers, drop off mail, continue on to St. Louis. Nobody expected Bill Anderson. 80 guerrillas surrounded the depot before the train even stopped. They came out of the Missouri woods like ghosts, horses and pistols and the black flag that meant no quarter, no surrender, no mercy. The conductor saw them first. He tried to reverse the train, but it was too late. The guerrillas were already boarding. There were 24 Union soldiers on that train. They were not combat troops. Most of them were engineers from the 1st Missouri, men who built bridges and repaired railroads, men who had joined the army to serve their country without having to kill anyone. They were heading home on furlough. Some of them had not seen their families in over a year. Some of them were counting the miles until they could hold their children again. Some of them were thinking about wives and mothers and the smell of home cooking. None of them were thinking about death. They should have been. Bill Anderson walked through the train cars slowly. His men followed behind, pistols drawn. They were looking for Union soldiers, looking for the blue uniform, looking for anyone connected to the army that had killed Bill's sister. The soldiers tried to hide. Some changed into civilian clothes from their bags. Some hid their uniforms under the seats. Some pretended to be passengers traveling on business. It did not matter. The guerrillas knew what to look for. They checked bags. They checked hands for calluses. They asked questions about hometowns and regiments and commanders. One by one, they found every soldier on that train. 24 men were dragged from their seats and forced onto the platform. Bill Anderson rode his horse along the line of prisoners. He looked at each face, young men, old men, fathers, sons, brothers, all of them now standing in their underclothes in the September sun, their uniforms piled on the platform beside them. One of the soldiers tried to speak. He was an older man, maybe 40. He had grey in his beard and fear in his eyes. "Please," he said, "we are not fighters. We are engineers. We build bridges. We have never hurt anyone." Bill Anderson stopped his horse. He looked down at the man. His face was expressionless. His eyes were empty. The eyes of someone who had seen so much death that one more meant nothing. Then he spoke. "My sister was 14 years old. She built nothing. She hurt no one. They killed her anyway." The engineer opened his mouth to respond, but before he could speak, Bill raised his hand. 10 seconds, he said. "I will give you 10 seconds to pray." The first soldier to die was a private from Illinois. He was young, maybe 19. He had freckles on his face and a letter from his sweetheart in his pocket. He had been planning to propose when he got home. Bill Anderson walked up to him, stood behind him, and began to count. 1, 2, 3. The private did not pray. He was too scared, too confused. He just knelt there in the dirt, trembling, trying to understand how his life had come to this. 4, 5, 6. Around him, the other prisoners watched in horror. Some were crying. Some were praying already, not waiting for their turn. Some were trying to find something in Bill's face that suggested mercy. 7, 8, 9. The private finally closed his eyes. His lips moved, but no sound came out. Maybe he was praying. Maybe he was just saying goodbye. 10. The shot was loud, louder than anyone expected. The private fell forward into the dirt. Blood pooled around his head. His letter from his sweetheart got wet. Bill Anderson did not look at the body. He just moved to the next man in line. 1, 2, 3. 24 men died on that platform. 24 counts, 24 prayers, 24 bullets. Some of the soldiers begged. Some offered money. Some tried to explain that they had nothing to do with Kansas City, nothing to do with the building collapse, nothing to do with Josephine Anderson. It did not matter. Bill killed them all. The whole process took less than an hour. By noon, 24 bodies lay on the wooden platform. Blood dripped through the cracks in the boards. The September sun beat down on the dead. And Bill Anderson sat on his horse and watched his men strip the bodies of anything valuable. Watches, rings, boots, photographs, letters, anything that could be sold or kept as a trophy. There was one man on that platform who did not die. His name was Thomas Goodman. He was a Union sergeant. He had stood in line with the others, had watched the executions, had heard the counting, had prepared himself to die. But when Bill Anderson reached him, something changed. Bill looked at him for a long moment. Then he turned to one of his men. "This one lives," he said. "We need a prisoner for exchange." Goodman did not understand. Why him? Why not one of the others? What made him different? He would never fully know. But he would survive Centralia. He would be the only Union soldier to walk away from that platform, and he would spend the rest of his life telling people what he saw, the counting, the prayers, the methodical execution of 24 unarmed men, 10 seconds at a time. Word of the massacre spread fast. By early afternoon, Union commanders throughout Missouri knew what had happened. 24 soldiers executed, a train robbed, a town terrorized. Bloody Bill Anderson had struck again, and this time he had left nothing but bodies. The news reached Major A.V.E. Johnston around 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Johnston was stationed nearby with a force of 147 cavalry soldiers. They were new recruits mostly, men who had joined the army in the final years of the war, hoping to serve their country before the fighting ended. Most of them had never seen combat. All of them were about to. Johnston was not supposed to engage the bushwhackers. His orders were clear. Monitor guerrilla activity, report movements, avoid direct confrontation. The Union commanders knew that Bill Anderson's men were too experienced, too well armed, and too dangerous for inexperienced cavalry to fight. But Johnston did not care about his orders. When he heard about the massacre at Centralia, something snapped. Maybe it was anger, maybe it was pride, maybe it was the simple human need to do something when faced with horror. He gathered his men, told them what had happened, described the 24 soldiers executed on the platform, the counting, the prayers, the blood. Then he asked them a question. Are we going to let them get away with this? 147 voices shouted no. They rode toward Centralia in a column of fury. Johnston led them. He was a good officer by all accounts, brave, dedicated, well liked by his men, but he was also inexperienced in this kind of warfare. He had trained for battles, for charges against enemy lines, for the kind of combat where numbers mattered and courage counted. He had not trained for Bill Anderson. There is something you need to understand about the guerrilla war in Missouri. It was nothing like the war in the East. There were no battle lines, no trenches, no formal engagements between uniformed armies. It was a shadow war, a war of ambushes and raids and sudden violence. The bushwhackers did not fight fair. They did not form ranks and charge. They used the terrain. They used surprise. They used weapons that gave them advantages no cavalry manual had ever anticipated. And they used those weapons with a skill that regular soldiers could barely comprehend. Each of Bill Anderson's 30 men carried between 4 and 6 revolvers. Think about what that means. A Union cavalry soldier had a single-shot carbine, 1 bullet. Then he had to reload. A process that took 15 to 20 seconds on horseback if you were good, longer if you were nervous. In that same time, a guerrilla could fire 24 shots, 24 bullets for everyone from the Union side. The math was simple. 30 guerrillas with 4 revolvers each meant 120 rounds in the first volley. 147 Union soldiers with single-shot carbines meant 147 rounds total. But only if every soldier fired, only if every shot counted, only if no one panicked. Bill Anderson understood this math. He had built his entire fighting style around it. Major Johnston did not understand it at all. Johnston found the bushwhackers 3 miles outside of Centralia. Bill Anderson's men were waiting in a field, not hiding, not retreating, just sitting on their horses at the edge of a tree line, watching the Union cavalry approach. Johnston could not believe it. 30 men against 147. They should be running. They should be fleeing into the woods where cavalry could not follow. Why were they just waiting? He would understand soon enough. One of Johnston's officers rode up beside him. "Sir," he said, "something is wrong. They should not be standing their ground. They must have a plan." Johnston looked at the guerrillas in the distance. He could see Bill Anderson at the front, the man with the scalps braided into his saddle, the man who had executed 24 unarmed prisoners that morning. He made his decision. "We charge," he said. "We have the numbers. We will overwhelm them." "Sir," the officer said, "our men are inexperienced. Perhaps we should wait for—" Johnston cut him off. "Those animals murdered 24 of our brothers this morning. We are not waiting for anything." He drew his saber, raised it high, and shouted the order that would kill him. "Charge!" 147 horses surged forward. The thunder of hooves filled the Missouri afternoon. Dust rose in clouds. Sabers gleamed in the sunlight. The Union cavalry charged with all the fury of men who had seen horror and wanted revenge. Bill Anderson watched them come. He did not move, did not order his men to retreat, did not show any fear. He just sat on his horse and watched 147 men ride toward their deaths. When the Union cavalry was 200 yards away, Bill raised his hand. When they were 100 yards away, he dropped it, and 30 guerrillas spurred their horses forward. What happened next took less than 15 minutes, but it changed everything. The two forces met in the middle of the field, Union cavalry with their single-shot carbines, guerrillas with their revolvers. The Union soldiers fired first. 147 shots rang out. Some hit their marks. A few guerrillas fell, but most of the shots went wild. Inexperienced soldiers on galloping horses firing at moving targets. The accuracy was poor. Then the guerrillas fired, and fired, and fired again. 24 shots per man, 30 men, 720 bullets in the first 30 seconds. The Union line disintegrated. Major Johnston died in the first exchange. A bullet caught him in the chest. He fell from his horse and landed face down in the Missouri grass. He never saw what happened to his men, never saw the slaughter that his order had created. Maybe that was a mercy. The surviving Union soldiers tried to retreat, but there was nowhere to go. The guerrillas were faster, better riders, better shots. They chased the fleeing cavalry across the field, firing as they rode. Men fell from their horses and were trampled. Men threw down their weapons and begged for mercy. Men tried to hide in the grass, in ditches, behind anything that might offer cover. The guerrillas found them all. Bill Anderson had given the prisoners on the platform 10 seconds to pray. He did not give the cavalry soldiers even that. His men rode through the field like the horsemen of the apocalypse, shooting, stabbing, killing everything in Union blue. There was no counting now, no ritual, just slaughter. 147 men had charged into that field. By the time the shooting stopped, almost all of them were dead. The Battle of Centralia lasted approximately 15 minutes. In that time, 143 Union soldiers were killed. 4 escaped. 143 dead in 15 minutes. Almost 10 men per minute. 1 man every 6 seconds. The guerrillas lost 2 men, 2 against 147. It was the most lopsided engagement of the entire Civil War. The worst Union defeat in the history of guerrilla warfare, a massacre that made the morning executions look like a prelude. Bill Anderson rode through the field after the battle. His men were already stripping the bodies, taking weapons, taking boots, taking anything of value. The Missouri grass was red with blood. Bodies lay everywhere, some in piles, some alone, some still twitching as they died. Bill stopped beside the body of Major Johnston. He looked down at the man who had led 147 soldiers to their deaths, the man who had charged against 30 guerrillas because he thought numbers would win, the man who had ignored his orders and let his anger make his decisions. Then Bill did something that would haunt Union commanders for months. He dismounted, he drew his knife, and he took Johnston's scalp. The bodies were found the next day. Union troops from a nearby garrison had heard about the battle and come to investigate. What they found was beyond anything they had prepared for. 143 dead, all of them shot, most of them multiple times, many of them mutilated after death, scalped, fingers cut off, faces destroyed. The 24 bodies from the train platform were still there too, still lying where they had fallen. The blood had dried in the September sun. The Union soldiers who found them vomited, wept, prayed. Then they began the grim work of collecting the dead. It took them 2 days to bury everyone. There were 4 survivors from Johnston's cavalry, 4 men out of 147, 4 men who somehow escaped the slaughter in that Missouri field, 4 men who would spend the rest of their lives remembering what happened on September 27, 1864. How did they survive? The stories varied. One man claimed his horse bolted at the first shot and carried him away from the battle before he could control it. He rode for miles before he finally stopped, ashamed that he had fled, grateful that he was alive. Another said he fell from his horse and lay still among the bodies, pretending to be dead while the guerrillas rode past. He heard them shooting wounded men, so they practiced, every day, every chance they got, until the revolvers became extensions of their arms, until firing became as natural as breathing. That is what Major Johnston faced at Centralia. Not just numbers, not just weapons, but men who had spent years perfecting the art of killing from horseback. His recruits never had a chance. There is a question that historians still debate. Did Bill Anderson know the Union cavalry was coming? Some evidence suggests he did, suggests that the guerrillas standing in that field were not waiting by accident, were not caught off guard, were exactly where Bill wanted them to be. Scout reports indicate that Anderson had lookouts watching the roads around Centralia all day. These lookouts would have seen Johnston gathering his men, would have seen them riding toward town, would have had time to warn Anderson and let him prepare. If true, it means the Battle of Centralia was not a spontaneous clash. It was a trap. A carefully designed ambush that used the massacre on the platform as bait. Bill Anderson knew that Union soldiers would want revenge, knew that some commander somewhere would ignore orders and come after him, knew that anger makes men stupid. So he waited, positioned his men in the field, let the Union see 30 guerrillas against 147 cavalry, and when Johnston charged, Bill sprung the trap. This interpretation makes Centralia even more chilling. It means Bill Anderson was not just a killer. He was a strategist, a manipulator, a man who understood human psychology well enough to predict how his enemies would react. He gave the prisoners 10 seconds to create terror. Then he used that terror to draw his real targets into an ambush. Everything was planned. Everything served a purpose, even the counting. The Union never caught Bill Anderson. They tried. For 14 months, from the death of his sister to his own death, Union forces hunted Bill Anderson across Missouri. They sent cavalry, they sent infantry, they sent their best trackers and their most experienced Indian fighters. None of them succeeded. Bill was too fast, too smart, too willing to disappear into the Missouri wilderness and emerge somewhere unexpected. He knew the land better than the soldiers who chased him, knew which farms were friendly, knew which paths led to safety, and which led to ambush. The only way to kill Bill Anderson was to do what he did to others, to set a trap, to wait in ambush, to strike without warning. That is what happened at Albany on October 26th. Union troops got lucky, got information about Anderson's location, got into position before he knew they were there, and they shot him out of the saddle like he had shot so many others. There is a kind of justice in that. The ambusher ambushed, the hunter hunted, the man who gave 10 seconds given no warning at all. But it took the Union 14 months and hundreds of dead soldiers to achieve that justice. 14 months of terror and raids and massacres. Centralia was just one day in that campaign. One day that killed 167 men. One day that proved Bill Anderson could win against any odds, if he had lived longer, if he had escaped that ambush in Albany. How many more would have died? We cannot know. History gave us the ending it gave us. Bill Anderson died at 24. The terror stopped. Missouri began the long process of healing. But the lessons of Centralia remained. The lessons about firepower and tactics and the terrible cost of fighting enemies you do not understand. Let us return to the 10 seconds one more time, because those 10 seconds contain everything you need to know about Bill Anderson. Everything you need to know about the kind of war he was fighting. The 10 seconds were not mercy. Bill Anderson was not a merciful man. He scalped corpses. He mutilated bodies. He did things that even his fellow Confederates found disturbing. The 10 seconds were not cruelty either. At least, not cruelty for its own sake. Bill could have made those deaths much worse, could have tortured his prisoners, could have drawn out their suffering for hours. The 10 seconds were calculation. They were designed to create maximum psychological impact with minimum effort. They were designed to spread terror beyond the battlefield. They were designed to make every Union soldier in Missouri imagine himself kneeling in the dirt, hearing the count, knowing that his life was measured in single digits, 8, 9, 10. That count became a legend. It spread through the Union Army faster than any official report. Soldiers whispered about it around campfires. Officers warned their men about the bushwhacker who counted before he killed. And some soldiers, hearing that count in their nightmares, decided they would rather desert than face bloody Bill Anderson. That was the point. That was always the point. Bill Anderson did not just want to kill Union soldiers, he wanted to break them, wanted to make them fear him so much that they could not function, wanted to win the war in their minds before he ever met them on the battlefield. The 10 seconds were psychological warfare, and they worked. What would have happened if Johnston had not charged, if he had followed his orders, if he had waited for reinforcements, if he had let his anger cool and his judgment return? Bill Anderson would have escaped. He would have ridden away with his 30 men, disappeared into the Missouri woods, and continued his campaign of terror somewhere else. The 24 soldiers on the platform would still be dead. That massacre had already happened. Nothing could undo it. But 143 cavalry soldiers would have lived, would have gone home to their families, would have had futures instead of graves. Johnston could not save the men on the platform. They were already dead when he arrived. The only question was whether he would add more bodies to the count. He chose to add them, and that choice, that moment of anger and pride and the desperate need to do something, killed more Union soldiers than Bill Anderson himself had killed that morning. Sometimes the worst damage comes from our own side. Sometimes the enemy does not have to beat us, we beat ourselves. Centralia was both. It was Bill's trap and Johnston's mistake. The ambush would not have worked without the charge. The charge would not have happened without the massacre. Both sides contributed to the disaster. Both sides share the blame, but only one side did the dying. There were families waiting. That is something we should not forget. 167 men died at Centralia, and every one of them had people who loved them, people who were waiting for them to come home. The 24 soldiers on the platform had families, wives who expected letters, children who expected fathers, parents who expected sons. The 143 cavalry soldiers had families too, new recruits with new wives, young men with sweethearts, boys who had promised their mothers they would be careful. None of them came home. The telegrams went out. The letters followed. Killed in action, died bravely, served his country. The words did not help, did not explain, did not bring anyone back. Some families waited years before accepting the truth. Some mothers refused to believe. Some wives kept setting places at the dinner table. Some children grew up believing their fathers would walk through the door any day now. War creates absences, creates holes in families that never fill, creates questions that never get answered. Why him? Why there? Why that day? There are no good answers. There is only the terrible randomness of violence. The soldier who boarded one train instead of another, the cavalry recruit who signed up 1 week instead of the next, the moment that put a man in Bill Anderson's path instead of somewhere safe. 167 moments, 167 families. That is the real cost of Centralia. Not the tactical lessons or the historical significance, the families. The sun set on September 27, 1864, over fields full of dead men. Bill Anderson and his guerrillas had ridden away hours before. They took what they could carry: guns, ammunition, horses, scalps. They left the bodies where they fell. The Union dead lay in the September grass, some on their backs, some on their faces, some in positions that suggested they had died running, some in positions that suggested they had died fighting. The 24 from the platform were still there too, still lined up, still stripped, still showing the world what happened to Union soldiers who fell into bushwhacker hands. Crows came as the light faded. Missouri crows, fat and bold and used to battlefields. They landed on the bodies, started their work. No one was there to chase them away. The burial parties would not arrive until the next day. Until then, the dead belonged to the birds and the flies and the silent Missouri night. 167 men, left to rot, left to be picked over, left to become part of the land they had died defending. That is what war looks like after the shooting stops. Not glory, not honor, just bodies and crows and the slow decay of everything that used to be human. Centralia changed the guerrilla war in Missouri. After September 27th, Union commanders took the bushwhackers more seriously. They changed tactics, changed weapons, changed everything about how they approached unconventional warfare. It was too late for Johnston and his men. But others would benefit from the lessons learned. The Union started issuing revolvers to cavalry units, started training them in the kind of mobile warfare that guerrillas had mastered, started treating the Missouri conflict as a different kind of war that required different solutions. Bill Anderson had taught them with blood and bodies and the worst defeat they had ever suffered. Teachers rarely get thanked for their lessons. Bill Anderson was no exception. The count echoes still. In Centralia, Missouri, there is a memorial to the soldiers who died that day, a stone marker listing names that can be identified, a reminder of what happened in that field, on that platform, in those terrible 10 seconds. People visit sometimes, descendants of the dead, historians researching the war, curious travelers who heard the story and wanted to see the place. They stand where Johnston stood, look across the field where the charge happened. Try to imagine what it felt like to ride into that wall of gunfire. Some of them say they can still hear the counting. 8, 9, 10. It is probably imagination. The mind creating sounds that are not there. But it feels real. In that field on a quiet day, with the wind moving through the grass, it feels like something is still counting, still waiting, still measuring the seconds until the next shot. This is the story of Centralia. 10 seconds to pray, 147 men to charge, 30 guerrillas to kill them all. Numbers that looked like Union victory, results that said massacre. A young man named Jesse James learning to kill. A major named Johnston learning that anger is not a strategy. A guerrilla named Bill Anderson teaching lessons that cost lives. 167 dead in a single day. 167 families broken. 167 futures erased. This is what war looks like when you see it clearly. Not the glory, not the heroism, just choices and consequences, actions and reactions. The terrible arithmetic of violence. 8, 9, 10. Remember the count. Remember Centralia. Remember the cost. End.